Well, I have 9:50 on my clock, so welcome back, everyone. If you stepped away, it is good to see you all. This is the third annual Summer Camp Day Camp Series, sponsored by the Marshfield Clinic Health System and the Wisconsin Department of Children and Families. This next section, I am pleased to introduce Dr. Jennifer Michaels. Dr. Jennifer Michaels is a board-certified clinical psychologist and health psychologist in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Health at Marshfield Clinic Health System. Dr. Michaels specializes in treatment of adult patients experiencing distress related to cancer and other physical illness, and in the treatment of mood, anxiety, and adjustment disorders. Dr. Michaels received her master's and doctoral degrees from Southern Illinois University, go Salukis. She completed her internship and postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Wisconsin School of Medicine and Public Health in the Department of Psychiatry, where she continues as an adjunct faculty member. Dr. Michaels currently serves as Director of Training for the Adult Clinical and Health Psychology Postdoctoral Fellowship Program. She is the Director of Graduate Medical Education Wellness and a member of the Physician and Allied Professionals Health Committee at Marshfield Clinic Health System. Dr. Michaels is a member of the American Psychological Association, Wisconsin Psychological Association, American Board of Professional Psychology, American Psychology Oncology Society, and National Register of Health Services Psychologists. Dr. Michaels additionally serves on the Wisconsin Psychological Association's Advocacy Council, where she works to promote legislation that improves mental health treatment access and quality. And so please, if you have questions, feel free to throw those in the chat. We will keep an eye on those, but we will take questions at the end. So Dr. Michaels, I will turn this over to you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much, Kathy. It's great to be with all of you today. It's a pleasure to talk with you and review this next topic. So we're going to shift gears now to talking about caring for staff in a different world that we live in today with all that's happened since the pandemic. And, my goal today is to help give you some strategies for grounding yourself and grounding your staff along the way. So let me go over to here and we'll move the slide. I have no disclosures to report related to any financial relationships associated with this. All right, so let's just review the learning objectives first today. So first, I would like you to understand the prevalence and the nature of stress in America, and what I'm going to refer to as the rise in existential distress across our population. We're going to talk a little bit about the impact of media and technology on our individual minds, as well as on our relationships and interpersonal interactions. I will describe how to address staff distress and make things more manageable for yourselves and your staff. We'll explore how to encourage healthy use of technology, both in and out of programming, to support staff well-being. And I'll go through a few specific strategies to promote healthy coping and interpersonal connection across your team members. So I want to give a little bit of a warning here. I have a little over 30 slides, and the first half of them are going to be a little bit of the dismal picture of where we're at in America with regard to stress and mental health issues and whatnot. But do not despair. The other half of the slides will be some solutions, some interventions, some handles to grab hold of to help you get through. So so hold on and hang on as we move through this a little further. All right, so I want to start off by just giving a pulse on what is happening across the American public. And there's really no better place to grab this pulse than from the American Psychological Association's survey, or Stress in America survey. The APA does this survey at regular intervals, and for a while it was quarterly. Now I believe it's twice a year that they're doing. And the last data that we have accessible to us is from not too long ago, October of 2022. And I just pulled out some of the really notable statistics that came from this pulse survey of adults in America. And what you can see there on the top is that over a quarter of our population, our adult population, are reporting that most days they are so stressed that they are struggling to function or cannot function. And this report of this degree of stress and impairment from the stress is highest among young adult women ages 18 to 34. Now, be aware that this survey only tapped adults, and what you've probably seen in the media reports in the last 1 to 2 months is that there is a crisis among adolescent girls, 12 to 18. So not only are we seeing high stress there, but also in this next group up of 18 to 34. With stress being really debilitating. The lead concerns that are presented or that were tapped among the group surveyed are laid out there. You can see inflation tops the list, with violence and crime shortly behind that. The political climate at 66% and the racial climate in the United States is being behind that, with climate change issues not far behind those four issues. A full 70% of adults do not think that people in our government care about them and their needs. 64% feel that their rights are under attack. And 38% of the American population responded that they are considering moving to another country as a result of what is happening in our country. 40%, or almost the same amount, consider moving to another state due to the political climate in their own state. 76% said that the future of our nation is a very significant source of stress in their lives. And just a small amount less than that say that this is really the lowest point in our nation that they can remember across their lifespan. 70% of those surveyed said that healthcare access, healthcare navigation is a significant stress in their lives. And as the CEO of the American Psychological Association said, it's clear that these impact of all of these uncontrolled stressors are really profound at this point across Americans. The phrase that they said out of this October survey was that there is a battered American psyche at this point, facing a barrage of external stressors that are mostly out of personal control. The survey found that the majority of adults in America are disheartened by government and political divisiveness. They're daunted by historic inflation levels and dismayed by the volume of widespread violence in our country. So, what a note to kick off on. I mean, this is really tough to see. As a further exploration of the degree of stress and the nature of stress in our country, 76% of adults now are reporting that they are experiencing at least one symptom as a result of all of this stress. And you can see how those symptoms play out with headache, fatigue, feeling anxious, and feeling depressed as leading the pack of symptoms. And almost the same amount report that they're experiencing additional symptoms beyond headache, fatigue, anxiety, and depression, namely feeling overwhelmed, having their sleep disrupted, and struggling with worry, struggling to control worry. And certainly we know that the pandemic has led to a lot of damage in our country, with the statistics now reporting that there's a 25% increase in the prevalence of mental health disorders, according to the World Health Organization study in 2022. Directly precipitated by the pandemic, with anxiety and depression leading the way as the most prevalent conditions. And the research really shows that these increased mental health, the mental health burden in our country is related to the high prolonged levels of stress exposure, unrelenting stress exposure in combination with increased social isolation. Currently, or at least a year ago, and this number has really not changed over the course of time. It surged in the spring of 2020 with the start of the pandemic, and has not remitted at this point. 30% of Americans are reporting symptoms of either anxiety disorder, a depressive disorder, and or both. And just for context, the baseline that we have typically seen for across the American population prior to the pandemic sat around 10 to 12%. So really a notable escalation. So, what is the effect of all of this? As I'm sure you can understand, we are seeing a higher level of what we're calling existential distress. So, what exactly is existential distress? Because you may have heard this batted around, and it's a little bit of a fuzzy concept. So, existential distress is a pervasive feeling of unease about life, with the meaning of life, with the purpose, what's the point, with the choices that we have before us, and in general, our sense of freedom in life. And it's a feeling that life may be inherently pointless. What is the point of striving, of trying to achieve, of pursuing degrees, of pursuing achievement in work, and of having a family? What's the point of that? If the result of that is going to be that we're still going to face catastrophe in our lives. And what this can lead to is a real feeling of identity confusion, a struggle to ground oneself in finding meaning. Now, I will say that having an existential distress or even existential crisis is often considered kind of a common experience in life, maybe even a necessary developmental experience in one's life. Many people would probably say that a midlife crisis picks up on many of the features of an existential crisis, where people are kind of pausing, um, re-examining their lives, and once again, kind of regrounding themselves to what matters to them and where is the meaning at the midpoint of their life. What we haven't seen before is this degree of existential distress across the population, and particularly in our adolescents and young adults to this degree. It's typically something that presents later in life. Now, this is really is a universal anxiety, and maybe even an inescapable anxiety. And it really precipitates from having no specific guide telling us what to do. The existentialists or existentialism as a theory operates on the premise that this is a necessary anxiety that we have to all deal with at some manner in our life with finding meaning, and that we all have the responsibility to have to craft meaning in our own lives. But what we're seeing at this point is that that responsibility for crafting meaning, for securing ourselves to tether points in life, is becoming overwhelming for many people. What we see is that when there is adaptive measurement or adaptive management of existential distress, people shift from feeling overwhelmed by the larger threats and the larger risks that are out there in life, and even a sense of risk of death, which is sort of the base fear associated with existential distress, to really learning to live with it, learning to live alongside the anxiety, learning to tolerate it while moving on with life rather than seeking to eliminate it. So that's ultimately the goal that we're all thinking about, is how do we get our skin for tolerating this level of kind of threat in our lives. So how is an existential crisis typically experienced, or how might you notice it in yourselves or in your staff or whatnot? Well, there's a number of these kind of standard symptoms that might present. Heightened anxiety or heightened burden from sad mood or depressive symptoms, feeling chronically overwhelmed, feeling kind of on edge much of the time, as if somebody's kind of, holding on by not as many fingers as they would like. Often people will behaviorally shift to increased isolation and wanting more alone time. There may be lower energy generally to go about day-to-day life. Loneliness may precipitate with this, but people may again seek shelter within a state of increased isolation, just to not be bombarded as much by the stressors. We tend to see increased rumination, or that stewing on stressors. And at the foundation, there's a loss of a sense of purpose in life, a loss of sense of meaning. And people are generally asking themselves, what is the point of all this? What is the point of my efforts? And I just have to, kind of validate, this is a scary thing to encounter at any phase of life. But imagine being 22 and thinking about these things. Um, The other things that I want to say about an existential crisis is, again, we have not seen this volume of distress in adolescents and young adults before, in any of our of those of us who are alive at this point of our existence. And this is pretty tough to encounter early in life. Um, the burden that we have with kids at this point of them having to think about these bigger issues is unparalleled to any other time in our lives. Typically, they're thinking about dating relationships, and they're thinking about what they want to do for school or other academic studies. They thinking about jobs and having fun and going to concerts and all those things. And right now, they're bombarded with many bigger realities that would frankly untether all of us, but hitting at an earlier developmental stage is particularly challenging. Um, so, what are you likely to see in your employees? And I'm just, this slide has felt important to me because I kind of want to forecast and ground you to what may come up or what may show up as you're hiring staff and as you're navigating the summer months. So across our population, you're generally going to see a higher level of baseline anxiety across the population. People are just more fragile. You may see higher mood regulation challenges, irritability. You just scratch the surface, and people will feel irritable easier or more quickly. Increased vulnerability to just getting overstimulated and getting overwhelmed by things. Kind of a less grit with navigating, less of a skin for navigating the just day-to-day regular stressors. You may see that fragility, sometimes of staff prone to increased tearfulness, lower frustration tolerance, and just a general reduction in psychological resilience overall. You may see staff have increased needs for support and/or increased needs for some time alone, some downtime, and then longer recovery time needs as well, with possibly the need for more breaks. And also, I think you should be prepared to have that staff may disclose mental health diagnoses with you. They may say, I've been depressed with depression, I've been diagnosed with depression, I've been diagnosed with anxiety, and I see a counselor or whatnot. There's just a crush of Americans who are seeking mental health treatment at this point, and people are more comfortable talking about that out loud. So overall, the general population, particularly adolescents and young adults, are really feeling these symptoms intensively. I spend a lot of my time in my roles working directly with medical residents and fellows. So these are young physicians who are going through training. And one of the things that I hear from our training directors in our institution is a recognition that a lot of the residents just don't seem to have the same level of psychological resilience that prior year residents had. But I think this is a lot of what is going on, and this is how I educate our training directors and faculty on the issues. So, what's media got to do with it? So media does play a very significant role in this. And so what we're seeing overall is an increased consumption of news via both traditional formats such as television as well as social media platforms. So in the television domain, I don't think I'm talking out of turn here, and you've all seen this, that we are just bombarded with negative news. If you watch the first 15 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes of any half-hour news program at both the national and the local level, you're going to get the rundown of every catastrophe that's happening locally, and little to no, really no focus on what is still okay or what might be positive in our communities that's happening. There's just a bathing in violence in the United States, racial injustice, the political strife going on, wars, climate crisis, and weather events, and inflation. So it's just this wave of really large, big stuff to digest. Then you shift to the social media platform, and it's more of the same and more of the same of this stuff. But in addition to that, our youth and young adults, really all of us, but particularly our youth and young adults, are exposed to a great deal of social comparison in the social media platform, maybe sparking fear of missing out on events that they're not included in. There's a lot of exposure on social media to struggling youth, where you have having to bear witness to other youth that are really struggling, which is hard to watch and be brought into or be part of, as well as exposure to thriving youth that can make you feel like everybody else's life might be far happier than yours, as well as a lot of exposure to superficial content. And in this, kind of news delivery ecosystem that we have going on now, there's just, our media and social media platforms are setting this up such that we feel compelled to click on the most salacious, most dramatic, most negative news of the day. And so that's what continues to stream into our consciousness. And also, it's really happening without any breaks. We're on a 24/7 news cycle, and so there is absolutely a steady diet of exposure to these existential threats. In fact, the social media algorithms, are set up to do it this way. And we got an inside look at this in the last couple of years when there was the Facebook whistleblower that was testifying in front of the federal government and talking literally about how social media platforms set it up to put this front and center. The algorithms that are in place promote this limitless scrolling, where the catastrophes of the day get the dominance on the feed. And then our smartphones that are right in our hands become essentially the delivery system, like a drug, infused into our veins. And interestingly enough, when they've looked at what happens in the brain when we get this steady diet of catastrophes, we actually see this dopamine release, which is sort of the pleasures and reward centers of the brain, but also, that energy section of the brain. But what all of this does is it really skews each of our perception of risk and threat. There was an interesting study going back years ago, back into the 70s, and I was born in the early 70s, which makes me really old. And it was in the early 70s when they started putting missing children on milk cartons. If for some of you who are in my generation, you might remember this phase. And what we saw out of that is that the population as a whole, when you ask them about risk appraisal, that your children could be kidnapped, it significantly increased because of that exposure, where you would get your milk carton and you'd see the missing child on the list. And so this is the same kind of thing that's happening in the social media context at this point, that when we get these catastrophes, it skews our sense of how possible or how real these things are and what they could happen. Now, I'm not saying any of that to dismiss that these are real threats. Violence is a real threat in America. Mass shootings really are happening, but it really does skew our sense of vulnerability to these issues and leads it to be a more ever-present threat in our minds. And what we see out of this is physiological response. We'll see rise in body tension, pulse rate increases, even while checking the news. So if we had sensors on people while they're looking at their smartphones, or we do cheek swabs to look at cortisol levels, while you're looking at your news feed, we would see increased physiological response, as well as an increased tendency towards intrusive or ruminating thoughts trailing after that. And I call it kind of like the jet trail, that happens after you take in media. The plane is kind of gone, but the jet trail persists in our minds, at least. We're likely to see increased anger, resentment, and anxiety generated by these exposures. So that's just kind of brewing or churning in us. We may even see increased alcohol use and diminished energy or motivation to do outside activities, because it just kind of collapses our ego strength and our sense of psychological resilience. Little things become more difficult to cope with out of this. So, I'm almost done with my negative slides here. I promise you on this. So what is the effect of this, of news and media consumption? Well, our brains are wired for danger. So we tend to be pulled into frequent monitoring of news. They've even given this labels such as doom scrolling, or it's, the disorder is called headline anxiety or headline stress disorder. And ultimately, it's contributing to increased mental health challenges across our population. You can see there the range of issues that are emerging out of this. With at its base, this increased feeling of vulnerability and uncertainty that's just sort of stirring within all of us. Now, some think that this may be a bidirectional relationship where those who tend to be more anxious about this stuff actually are seeking out more media exposure as a means to try to alleviate distress, that they're kind of looking for it as a way to ground themselves or soothe themselves. But often, that's to no avail. And I will say that we are kind of in all new territory here, because prior to the pandemic, all of the studies that we had on the social or the psychological effect of media exposure really focused on acute time limited events like September 11th catastrophe. And they didn't focus on these long standing, these like chronic, um, catastrophic events like climate change, like violence in our society. So we don't really yet know what is going to be the effect on the psyche beyond what we're already starting to see of increased general mental health difficulties, of exposure to things that don't have a clear ending. They don't have a conclusion where we can ground ourselves to say it's over. Um, and while we are more connected than ever now via our phones and other routes, many people are saying that they feel more alone than ever. So currently, or at least in the Pew Research Center noted that in 2021, 85% of Americans owned a smartphone, and that is an increase from 35% owning one in 2011. The research studies range from 96 to 344 in terms of the frequency or the number of times a day in which we check our smartphones. So that can be up to once every 4 minutes, we may pull and check our smartphone in some manner. And now there is a tendency to really prioritize the online engagement and engagement with our phones over face-to-face connection. And that really accelerated with the pandemic. There is a significant increase in remote work across our population, and a large turnover in the workforce, which is further untethering us from a sense of connection. We have increased disconnection with that, where it takes more energy now to even know who your coworkers are because it's in such flux. And people often don't feel they have the energy to go seeking out and building those new relationships in the wake of all of that changing so quickly. The frequency of uninterrupted, really human moments of that face-to-face exchange are rare. And so, even if you go out to coffee with someone, the smartphone's laying on the table and people are picking it up and engaging the smartphone or getting text messages. And all of this leads to quite a negative impact on our social fabric, and particularly on our children who are, bearing witness to us as parents, engaging our smartphones. In fact, there is now a term for this that I'll put in front of you called nomophobia, which is short for no mobile phone phobia, a fear of being out of cell phone range or without our phones. And what you'll see is that some recent statistics on this is 66% of us suffer from nomophobia. It's more prevalent in women than men, with women being more anxious about being separated from their phone than men. And 66% of people sleep next to their phone, with 20% of people preferring to go without shoes than be without their phones at any given time. And 72% of people report that they are almost always within 5 feet of their phones. So really, I mean, the phones have become really attached to our hip at this point. The effects of digital technology on children and teens cannot be overemphasized. 15% increase of technology usage through the pandemic, where we just really saw a scaling up of engagement with digital technologies. 61 or 60, nearly 62% of which is coming through the smartphone avenue. And this is increasing brain functioning. You know, it's compromising sleep and cognitive abilities in our children and contributing to increased risk for depression, anxiety, and ADHD conditions. Now, it isn't all bad. We do see some benefits actually of video game exposure, where there has been reduced depression and anxiety from having this tool of distraction, essentially, when it's kept within limits. And video games can also promote increased creativity, some cognitive skills, and general cognitive sharpness. But overall, there are not great impacts from having so much technology. And if I haven't belabored the point at this point in the presentation, the downsides of technology are substantial. For young adults, we see that those who use social networking sites more often tended to feel less happy overall. But those with positive supports, with meaningful positive reports in the supports in the social media platform, tended to have lower depression and anxiety. So it sort of depends on the quality of your engagements in that format. For high school students, rates of depression were higher for those who were regularly using social media sites. And what we see, particularly out of social media sites like Facebook, Instagram, all of the others, of which I'm fairly disconnected from at this point, is that low self-esteem can emerge from it, tendencies towards negative social comparison, that fear of missing out, and that sense that others are happier than ourselves. So difficulty grounding ourselves to what is normal and am I okay, kind of in okay range with, you know, my feelings and my engagements and the things that I'm doing. We also tend to see decreased empathy emerging out of a lot of social media use and a general desensitization on the emotional psychological front, where things, we get this dulling of impact, where things that might have led to like stronger feelings or even outrage almost become kind of fogged over or glazed over from it. So the bottom line here, you know, currently our teens and our young adults, so your camp staff members and many of the camp kids who you're going to be swimming in this summer are really bathing in this bizarre mix at this point of this extensive exposure to these deep, scary realities that are out there of violence, political strife, climate change, while they're also bathed in this kind of preoccupation with more superficial content on social media, with not a lot of in between those two things. So this giant stuff and then this superficial content. And, you know, we've just never seen a generation or generations of people exposed to this kind of divide before. And, you know, when we think about Erik Erikson's stages of psychological, the 8 stages of psychological development, and I'm targeting these age groups on this slide here of 12 to 18 and then 18 to 40, and particularly 18 to 34, you see the stage that Erikson identified in 12 to 18-year-olds. It's identity versus role confusion. So kids are really trying to figure out, who am I? And how am I going to participate in this society? What is the roles that I'm going to take on for work, for academic study and whatnot? And then at that next stage up, it's really social connections. And how do we find intimacy? How do we connect with people? And, you know, what we're seeing of these larger existential crises and then media influences, it's really a hard hit to these 2 stages of development, unlike any prior generation has ever had to navigate. So the question really becomes, how do people center themselves in the wake of this, and how do we as Generation Xers and older help ground our younger populations with this? So I'm done with all the negative stuff, I promise here. So let's move on to thinking about interventions and what do we do here? So first, I just want to say it's most important to put on our own oxygen masks and then help those around us. So as you remember, when you get on a plane, they'll say the oxygen will drop from it. Secure your own mask before you secure the mask of those around you. we're going to think about that as well for interventions and for coping here. We're got to put on our oxygen masks somewhere. So how do we do this? What to encourage in yourselves, and then as well as in your staff, and then as a trickle down to our teens and youth. First of all, number one thing is literally what I'm going to call a dietary media restriction, almost like we'd have dietary restrictions with food. The main thing that I want to encourage is really limiting news exposure, watching news only at specific times and limiting the length of time in which we have media exposure, and then encouraging this in our staff and in our youth. I can't emphasize enough that that's the number one and easy thing to do. Sorry about the pop up here. So the next thing is thinking about right sizing the news to our personal life. Oops, I'm losing you guys here. Sorry. Sorry about that. My PowerPoint clicked off here. I'm not sure why that was. Let me come back here. All right. Can you see it again? Can somebody give me a thumbs up?
Yep.
Is it back? Oh, but we're back to the beginning, aren't we here? Well, that was weird. I'm not sure why that happened. Okay. Gonna cycle through these slides. We got to go back. Hold on. Taking you for a ride here. For whatever reason, something else kicked me out here. All right. Here we go. Back to interventions, and I think we were right here. Yep. So right sizing our news to our personal lives. So we have to pause and really think about now, what are my exposures here? What is still in my control? What do I have? What can I keep in my focus? So when we get these exposures, it becomes easy to get kind of pulled into them. But what I would say is I'm really encouraging you to ground back to your local community, going local to your own life, and thinking about your main tether point of relationships and control that you have in your life, which is sort of what we mean by right sizing that to your own personal experience. The other thing that becomes important is trying to pair news exposure with other mood enhancing activity immediately following it. So what we don't want to do is have the news exposure and then let it just carry us off into Neverland. So things like engaging upbeat music, going out for a walk or being in nature, exercise activities, or other self-soothing activities become an important way of kind of grounding ourselves and keeping it from hijacking our lives in the moment. And then also just engaging proactive strategies that help us address the manage. So whenever we can impose control and influence and agency on things that seem big in our lives, we're likely to be better. So that's thinking about what can we control. Could we get active with any issues that are particularly striking to us, as opposed to being passive observers, and in essence be part of the solution, to it as a means of regaining control. Now, be aware here of the tendency of all of us as human beings, the psychological tendency to make things that are possible probable in our minds. That's a common psychological fallacy, that we think about things that are possible and they escalate in our minds to becoming probable. So it is possible to get struck by lightning, but it is not probable to get struck by lightning. So that kind of reeling it back tool can be really helpful with this amount of existential distress that's floating out there. And for adults, when we think about adults, how can we help our children, our teens, and young adults? Well, first of all, you can assist them with this very risk appraisal thing that I'm talking about. You can support them in shifting from feeling vulnerable to this stuff to thinking about avenues of control, and mostly helping them think about who are the helpers. Who do they turn to? Who are the people that they grab hold on? Because that's where we're at our best. One of the books that I just want to mention is from Imagination Press, and you can get this through the American Psychological Association elsewhere. And it's a book specific to like news issues, what to do when the news scares you. And that may be helpful for particularly younger kids in ages 5 to 10 or 12. And then when we think about adult interventions, one of the things that is most important here is really to slow it down. journaling can be a way of doing that. It gives us an enhanced capacity to do risk appraisal and center ourselves a little more. We can also implement worry time, where we designate literal time in our lives, no more than 15 minutes, no more than once or twice a day, not right up against bedtime. But 15 minutes nonetheless, where we allow ourselves to worry. We literally allow yourself to worry as much as you want to worry during that time. But the goal there then is to button it up. And when you notice yourself slipping into worry during other times of the day, seeing if you can't catch it and postpone to your designated worry time. And it's a containment strategy, essentially a compartmentalization strategy to narrow the worry time into a zone. Also, simply seeking out others and debriefing is probably our our best strategy. So, oh, sorry, I skipping there. So how do we, so another strategy that we can do to help ourselves in this is cultivating optimism. And we have this excellent little piece in our brain, the inferior frontal gyrus, which selectively filters out bad news for us and brings it into context with newly acquired information that we have. Our brains literally do this. We can help it along by trying to cultivate an optimism bias, where we can try to focus on what is positive in life. We know that optimists enjoy better mental and physical health and generally tend to be more resilient. So we can train our brain to attend to what is positive and integrate that. We can focus intently on what is good today. Couple of key ways to do that I'm going to come back to are mindfulness practice and instituting the 3 good things exercise every day. There's a tremendous amount of research behind the 3 good things exercise. If done consistently for a minimum of 2 weeks of time, we see positive brain effects from calling up in the brain and priming the brain for noticing what is still okay in life. Now, we do this in psychology or in behavioral health at meetings. So when we initiate a meeting, we will literally say, let's go around the room and somebody identify 1 good thing that they've got going on. So we prime the staff literally to have to orient to what is still okay. It's a great tool to shove focus in that direction towards what we have control over and what's positive. I also just want to talk about healthy device management and, what we can do for control in this arena. So first of all, we can't bypass media, entirely. We all know that. But what you can do and what you can encourage in your staff is literally having them turn off news and social media notifications. There is no reason to continue to get that hit of that ping coming through in that drug delivery system that our smartphones are now, when we can simply eliminate that by turning off notifications. I talked to my kids driving in today. I'm like, I'm giving a presentation about notifications. Do you guys have these coming through? And they said, yes. And I said, my goodness, turn them off, kind of thing, as a mental health tool. We can also set up tech-free periods of our day where we say we're not going to have, our phones out during 6 to 8 when we're doing dinner and we're just doing homework and we're talking with each other and trying to reconnect as a family. Certainly restrict phones from the dinner table. That's a really important strategy. Ideally, we would limit social media checks to a 15-minute time frame and not let that carry us off again into Never Land. The goal here is to practice quiet time for recharging and try to untether from picking up our phones all the time when we have idle time. And we can even model this behavior for our staff, for our family members, and even model it out in the community. So if you're standing in line in the grocery store waiting to check out, what's the main thing you do? Pull your phone. Instead, see if you could engage somebody around you. You're demonstrating great things and you're giving yourself a skin for this, but also showing your kids how to do it. So what's the upside of technology? Well, there are many things. So I don't want to say that this is all bad because there's tons of quality apps that are available on our smartphones. And I just highlight a few on this slide. So there's great fitness tracking steps and nutrition and weight management apps that can really help with our overall health. There are tons of psychological and wellness apps, and one that I would encourage you all to look at and to download after this presentation, like download right away, It's called the Healthy Minds Program. Healthy Minds Program. It's a dark blue app with a white H and an M in the app. It's free on iOS and Android devices. I have no stakes in this app, but it is generated or produced by the University of Wisconsin-Madison Healthy Minds Program, and it is excellent. It was rated as one of the top 3 apps by New York Times Review of the best apps in mindfulness meditation, healthy minds programming, in addition to Calm and Headspace as the 2 other ones. Those require subscription surveys. But Healthy Minds Program, I can't recommend it enough. We're doing this with a lot of our healthcare workers at this point in this app. Also, there's healthy coping apps. COVID Coach and Virtual Hope Box are 2 excellent apps. These offer a range of healthy coping tools, and they're produced or developed by the Department of Defense in combination with the Veterans Administration. They are well done. And then a variety of suicide prevention apps like Virtual Hope Box, the Not Okay app, and SAMHSA's Suicide Safe app. So these are really some of the most quality apps that you can get in terms of health, psychological well-being. There's also a lot of sleep support, social support, and certainly music is a dominant part of the upside of technology that revives us and are good ways that we can interface. So a few other things here. Just want to mention what Millennial and Gen Z staff are going to expect. This population, more than Gen Xers, want better mental health benefits, better mental health support and access from their employers. They are talking directly about needing mental health days off. They're saying that workplace flexibility is really critical to their well-being. And they are really accelerating the movement for mental health days in addition to physical sickness days as becoming a standard feature of the workday. So just want you to know that this is kind of how you meet them where they're at. So what can you do as directors of camps to provide some psychological grounding strategies to your staff? Well, first of all, one of the biggest things you can encourage, in addition to what I've mentioned so far, is an exercise called setting intentions for the day in your staff. And this is a private sort of strategy where you encourage each of your staff to think about, what is my intention for today? What am I going to try to achieve? And this can be anything from as simple as, I'm going to try to say hello or smile to 3 people today as I go about my day. Or I'm going to seek out Olivia, this staff member, and ask how she's doing today as my intention for the day. Or today I'm going to focus on really enjoying the outside weather and the fact that it's sunny and we've got blue skies. That is my intention for the day. So this is a grounding strategy. It's a way of orienting our day around something that is simple, something that can be anchored to human connection or joy or meaning in our day, as a way to orient ourselves. It's a really great, simple strategy that I think could be infused into all of our staff members as a way to ground them. Also, as directors of camps, and you can provide value-based or principle-based drops in the bucket, is what I want to call, where you embed into your conversations statements about, why are we here? What is the purpose of our camp? What are we doing here? What are some of the global things that are anchoring us to the day-to-day roles that we have? What's the importance of this work? And so being able to say, hey, we're here to give kids a good experience and bring joy, to revive them a little bit, to give them a sense of connection with nature. When you can embed some of those tether points into your staff, it helps them not lose their ground as much, and to kind of have something to wrap their hands around, their heads around mostly. Another thing that you can do is support your staff in using what I call the triple R model, regular recharging respites. And I'll talk a little bit about doing this in little tiny fragments even, but taking little breaks to steal away, where they might, just take 15 minutes, where they literally take a break, where they're not exposed to a stimulation. Implementing of the 3 good things exercise. And then again, just anchoring your staff to our core principles, which really foundationally ground us the best, which is human kindness and compassion. Our goal is just to connect and be kind and compassionate with one another as a central orienting feature. So how do we do some of this? First of all, I love the quadruple M model. And how am I doing, Cynthia, on time? Can I have a few more minutes here where I can wrap up?
You got a couple minutes, yeah.
All right, good.
We're good. I
I'll
yep.
get through. I'll get through. It's running a little longer than I hoped, but the quadruple M model is a great thing. And so it's the making the most of many moments. And how do you do this? First of all, you try to get out of your head. John Kabat-Zinn said, drop in, drop out of the head, and try to shift your attention and your observations to the now, like what's right in front of your face, like what's happening right now in your sensory experience, and then really notice details around you. So might be things like noting this little cutie pie, okay, on the screen, and all the little dimples and the bright shiny eyes, really hyper focusing and going into hyper observer mode. That is one of the easiest ways to ground oneself and to kind of come out of this chatter that we have going on in our head. The other thing is just implement breathing techniques. Breathing are number one things of getting that sympathetic nervous system to quiet down. And the number one thing that I love is what the Navy SEALs do, which is box breathing. And it's literally counting to 4 as you think about outlining the edges of a box. So breathing into 4, pausing to 4 across the top of the box, exhaling to a count of 4, and then pausing as you come along the bottom of the box. And literally doing this 3 to 4 times can really quiet that body symptom as a way of grounding oneself, again, physiologically and psychologically. Mindfulness practice is one of the best things to do, and that Healthy Minds app will help you along in this practice. But you can do this in little drips, literally 2-minute clips, okay? So you could think about doing it when you're showering in the morning. Literally, when we're in the shower, we tend to be up in our heads, thinking about what we're going to wear and what are we going to do, and we got to do this, and how we're going to get out the door. You could literally just practice being in the shower in your mind, like just notice being in the shower, the hot water or the smell of the soap. You could do this while you're eating. You could do this while you're driving, and you'd probably be a better driver if you really just focused on what do I see on the road, what do I see in the periphery, sipping your coffee in the morning. So these are little ways that we can pull out of that larger looming chatter of stuff into a place of refuge in the mind. What's the secret sauce here? Really, the big kahuna secret sauce? Well, it's this. It's gratitude practice. Okay, it's really getting and anchoring to what am I grateful for? What still works? What is okay in my life? And again, I'm coming back to, and I know I've belabored this point, but the number one way of doing this is the 3 good things exercise. Now, if you're going to implement this in your own life and encourage it in staff, one of the ways to make it more potent is to write it down. So I put this into my phone, like at night, and I know you're saying, wait a minute, didn't you say to untether from the phone? Yes, I did, but I literally put it, and I keep a chronicling in my phone at night where I think, what are 3 good things from today? And I just put the date and I put my 3 good things. And it can be as simple as, ran into so-and-so, really enjoyed that. It can be, I'm glad my eyes worked today because I got to see, sunshine. It can be, I had a fun moment with my kid. Don't make it complicated. It can be simple. So these are a few tools that you can really implement that can make a substantial dent in how you're doing yourself as you direct in a very stressful role, I trust, and as you guide your staff. So there it is. There's a few ideas. Let me see if I can go back here. So I'm happy to entertain questions that came in the chat and some of the time that we have left. Kathy, I wasn't monitoring the chat, so maybe Kathy, you'll have to help me here.
Yep. It's hard to see from the share screen perspective, that's for sure. And thank you, Dr. Michaels. Yeah, I think, some really, really great information. And there's a couple questions in the chat, but before I lose it, you talk about gratitude practice. And I know with the students at the university, I always tell them, like, give yourself some grace in some cases, right? I think I learned this from you. It's like, we just got to be good enough. Not way up here. We got to be just good enough. That's your quote, not mine. But I think it's those continued reminders. So, a couple questions. One has to go with the mental health days. The question is really, do staff not see necessarily vacation or personal time off as mental health days? Is there a differentiation of an expectation from staff?
Yeah, well, I think historically in our society, a lot of times we box people in with sick days where you have to sort of say what your symptoms are, or sometimes employers, even my employer, has required you to have to sometimes get like a, medical note, from it. So it's not been thought of in this other territory, but I definitely think there's a shift to this. And I think even just saying it aloud to staff that, part of your PTO time, your days off, if it's needed, to kind of rebuild resilience, restore yourself a little bit, that is legitimate. So just saying it out loud and legitimizing it can
Hmm.
help make it a thing and make it acceptable.
Yeah, and I think, those 15-minute breaks that you're talking about, it's short, it's a short time period. You probably, depending on where you are in your program, can build that in some way. Or, this, we talked about this earlier. It's like structuring some staff support if somebody needs to step away because they need that mental health break, that you can actually have somebody step in that way as well. So, the other question, screen free during the day is one of the philosophies within this camp. How do we promote this with the exception of necessary calls with our staff, right? So Kelly and I were kind of having a back chat conversation about, like, no wonder that our staff get upset because we're literally saying put your phones away when they are so embedded as culturally, like it's part of who they are, not just what they're doing just to irritate people. So is there any recommendation in relationship to kind of how do we bridge that?
Right. Well, I guess as a psychologist, I'm always, prone to not swinging dramatically to the other side. So I think with staff, if you can say, hey, this is one of our goals is to untether a little bit because this is important for, kind of carrying out the day and for, for our kids and whatnot. But we realize that you're going to have to detox a little bit. So if you can structure it with saying the first couple weeks, we're just going to see if we can, kind of bit by bit whittle down, when you might have checks. But I wouldn't eliminate it completely. I wouldn't go dramatic one, but you're probably going to have to do
Hmm.
kind of a um, elimination kind of a protocol where it's a paced
Yeah.
withdrawal from the phones with your staff over a couple week period of time, and you
Mhm.
narrow the time in which they have exposures.
Yeah, and I think from where I sit, from the practitioner's standpoint, if this was me working directly in a program, I think to those of you on the call, I have a couple things. One, you can start this in your staff training, right? So that you bring staff before your kids even get there. You're doing some sort of training with them where you have this conversation about we need to untether and give them, and why they need to know why. You need them to be present and in the moment and mindful. The other piece is I would strategize with them, right? It's about engagement of like, how do we effectively do this so you can still feel connected, yet we still maintain presence in the program. Like, and so rather than you telling them, you strategize collectively together on how to do this. This is where the Gen Zers who are really embedded, like really behind your program, can be really helpful to say, you know why? Because when it comes peer to peer is really different than when it comes from supervisor to,
Right.
staff in your program. Yeah, consensus building. Thank you,
Yeah.
Vinny. Yep.
Perfect. Yeah, I think whenever you can engage them and empower them to be offer feedback and be, problem solving about the solution, we're in better stance with our relationship building with
Yep.
staff.
Absolutely. Any last questions from the group? I don't see any. I was taking a lot of really great note, especially the mindfulness practice. I think, it's really always mindful for all of us to go like, I'm walking down the street, stop looking at my phone, putting my headphones in. I'm just going to walk and listen to whatever it is, right? To be
Right.
where we are when we
Right.
can do that. Building that into your staff training in some way where you actually separate out some mindfulness time for them to, because mindfulness is a practice. It's not, you can do it, but it really takes time to kind of, because it's easy for the brain to go, oh, I have to make dinner tonight. So, or whatever, or
Right.
I have an arts and crafts thing coming up. I need to really work on, those pieces. And so, how do we put our staff, and you literally build that into your staff training. It becomes part of your camp program and not separate from.
Right. And I think, again, I want to just emphasize the research really suggests is robust that this doesn't take much and it really pays big dividends. So these little 2-minute clips, these little chunks of time can really make a dent in restoring resilience or at least buffering and keeping resilience at a better level than what it would be without these little mini kind of exposures. So don't discount the little 2 to 3 minute clip of pause, come out of the mind, and have a little separation to ground back to what's right in front of your face, as opposed to being caught in our heads or on our
Yeah.
phones.
Well, and I think, it's really going to be helpful for you all to approach with your staff why. Why are you needing to, so the black and white, so I have a big background in like waterfront and in pools and settings. I'm like, you don't need your lifeguards looking at their phone. They have a bigger job to do when the, so that's a pretty black and white. But I think they need to also, our staff need to understand the why behind what we're asking of them, especially when it is a shift in their culture in some ways. But any last questions from the group? I saw Kelly posted something, or was that just to me? So anyhow, easier to do mindfulness when you're not in crisis and it's already part of your day. That's really true. Mindfulness pays off in dividends also when you actually end up in crisis. So you can just be like, take a minute, do the box breathing, take a moment. I'm guessing this is why the Navy SEALs do this. They are prepping to do whatever it is they're going to do in the height of what they're going to do. So it kind of gives you those different perspectives. So it is 10:49. Dr. Michaels, thank you so much for your time. Don't go anywhere. I feel like we're like on a talk show. I said this earlier. It's like, don't go anywhere. We have more coming up. So we thank you for your time as always. It is much appreciated. And you all don't go anywhere. Stay tuned. Dr. Sally Scoville is coming up, and we are going to start talking about, I'm looking for a title, the tough conversations. And this is part of that tough conversation, because it's like when you are trying to, what might look like, strip me of what I like to do, how do we have those conversations? And so don't miss it. Dr. Scoville will be with us. She's coming in from a class, I think. So she's coming in a little, what some people would, she's coming in hot. She's coming in fast. So take some time, step away, get a beverage, step outside, take a breath of fresh air, be in the moment. We will see you in about 10 minutes. Dr. Michaels, thank you so much.